So this is Hands Off Venezuela video 2 against the US-backed coup that's happening um, in Venezuela, the attempt to undermine the sovereignty of Venezuela. I want to quote in the United Nations Charter, Article 2.1, 5, Paragraph 4. All members, all member states, shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. So, this is very important because we need to understand that Venezuela is a sovereign nation, and it cannot be told what to do by the international organs of the United States and its various imperial apparatuses, which is namely the nations that rely on U.S. economic and military aid, Colombia being a major example, and also the European Union in terms of its sort of neo-colonial idea that it can impose this requirement for an election to happen within 8 days of its saying so in a sovereign nation. I would like to talk about what's happening internally in Venezuela. Juan Guaido is the leader of the National Assembly, opposition leader to the Socialist Party, which is run by President Maduro. The National Assembly is a body, and then there's another organization that Maduro set up as well, which is mainly backing the government. So there are two legislative bodies, and they act in opposition towards each other. There are many things to be said in terms of a critique of constitutionality and the way in which Maduro has handled the fall in oil prices, which has been one of the major reasons because Venezuela was, in my opinion, overly dependent on petroleum exports, and also the fact that Chavez, as a person who was able to mobilize the masses in a way in which pulled many millions of people out of poverty, created a kind of cult around himself so that when he died, the internal contradictions of the movement were no longer acceptable, and you now have this kind of Maduroism which is taken over. And so the movement of which had rejected Chavez's referendums. In fact, there were two initiatives that he put towards the people, which were rejected, and he accepted that democratic decision. And so there's a line that must be drawn, I think, between Chavez and Maduro, but also there's critique to be made internally inside of Venezuela. However, Juan Guaido is basically calling on the military to commit treason by joining him, and he has absolutely no legitimacy. I mean, no one has elected him to be the leader of anything, except to be in the National Assembly. And I'd like to ask the viewers now just to think for a second, because if this were happening in a quote Western nation, let's just have a thought experiment. If the United Kingdom, which is going through an incredibly devastating political and potentially also now economic crisis. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that Jeremy Corbyn or a member of the Liberal Democratic Party or something like that, opposed to Theresa May, suddenly came out and said, you've been defeated in the Parliament incredibly. You're running this nation into the ground. You have no legitimacy. The people don't support you. We're going to be, living under WTO, World Trade Organization rules. We won't have access to European single market. You're going to impoverish the entire country. You're taking us off the deep end. And so I'm calling on the British military to defect and to help me remove you from office. Now just think about that for a second. What would happen? Okay? What would happen? Now, the fact that Juan Guaido is walking around freely, although his passport's been taken away, meeting with, presumably members of the opposition, and I think also quite openly with U.S. Attaches or U.S. Probably U.S. intelligence officials, says a lot about the criticism that Maduro gets for being an authoritarian. For instance, if Hillary Clinton had come out and said Donald Trump is not a legitimate president, he lost the vote by 3 million, it was influenced by the Russians, he's going to lead the nation into chaos, which he did, and I'm calling on the U.S. military to oppose him and join me in my opposition to Donald Trump. That's treason. That's treason. And it would be treated as treason in any other country, whether it was Marie Le Pen versus Macron in France, or the leaders of PO versus the leaders of peace here in Poland. When a nation has an opposition that's actively calling on the military to overthrow the president of that country with the backing of the United States and the potential for U.S. military intervention, that's a coup. Okay, that's a coup. That's treason. And Juan Guaido is he's sort of going about his business freely. So it really belies, or it really makes one think about whether or not Maduro's government is incredibly authoritarian when we consider what would happen in the West. So going back to international law, there is no legitimacy, there is no Security Council resolution, there is no legitimacy in any sort of intervention, economic, political, or military, of course not. And we need to be mobilizing against a U.S.-backed coup in Venezuela. It's unacceptable. It would lead to Libya of Latin America, basically, where then U.S. Vulture capitalists would basically come in and chew up the spoils of the country. Juan Guaido and his crew are not about liberating the people of Venezuela in order to create a more equitable society. Okay, these are folks who are aligned with the farthest right in the United States and in Latin America, from the neo-Nazi, neo-fascist, homophobe Bolsonaro in Brazil to the neo-fascist white nationalist Donald Trump and Dr. Strangelove character Bolton. Okay, these are warmongers, these are right-wing people, and Guaido has aligned himself with them. He's on the wrong side of history, and we cannot allow him to take power and then give up all of Venezuela's resources to Western oligarchs.